In 57 AD, there was sort of a problem, and the problem in the world was this. There were an awful lot of people who were looking for God to put the world back together and had looked for thousands of years for that to happen, and it finally we got some big break in the whole long history of it because Jesus came. So that was a really, really good thing, and we thought, man, God's program is on track here and we're going well. But the trouble is that when he came, he died and was crucified and rose again. That's great. But then he went up into heaven and he didn't come back. And we thought he was really going to put the world back together, but so far he hasn't, and we're really kind of wondering, okay, is God's program kind of run amok? Is it run afoul? Is it really going to take place or is it not? And to make matters worse, he came to his own people, Israel, but his own people basically rejected him, and so they still turn away from him, and they're dogging Paul at every spot he goes in his missionary journeys, rejecting him and pushing him away, so he keeps going to the Gentiles. So there are a couple of things that are kind of bothersome here about thinking we had a handle on God's program and yet not really having it because Jesus came, but he didn't put the world back together, and he hasn't used Israel to do it. So is God righteous? Is he morally upright? Does he keep his promises or does he not? And Paul says, I have an answer for that, and here's my answer. The answer, God is absolutely righteous. He is upright inside, and he keeps his promises to everyone in all of his relationships according to his covenant. But it is true that the world has run amok. The world has completely run off the rails, and it is completely a mess. Romans chapter 1, right? People have rejected the truth of God, they suppressed it, and they've replaced him with idols and that sort of thing. And so the whole world is totally lost apart from him. Now, there might be some people who are kind of sitting on the sidelines, kind of shaking the finger at the rest of the world, saying, yeah, that's true about those people, but not us. Those, of course, would be the Jewish people, but the truth is they're just as lost too, Romans chapter 2, right? Just because they have the law doesn't mean they really have any kind of advantage. I mean, they have an advantage, but not a saving one, all right? And just to prove it to you, I can cite some Gentiles who actually have their lives changed, and they're actually doing what the law requires, which God rewards with righteousness, when in fact Jewish people who have the law but don't do it are going to fall short. So you might be thinking that since the Jewish people who have the law are no really better off than the Gentiles, that maybe God's promises have failed. But let me just say, I'll talk more about this later, but let me just say for right now that number one, just because they've been unfaithful doesn't mean God isn't going to be faithful. He will, and I'll get to that in a second, but let me just say that. So let me get back to my main argument then, and that is simply this. Let me just kind of draw this whole section to a climax and prove to you that everyone, apart from faith, is absolutely without hope. And I'll quote some Old Testament scriptures to prove that. But the good news is that God has indeed sent his Son as the atonement, as the solution to be just and the justifier, just because he punishes sin, and justify because he is already putting the world back on track one person at a time. Right? Now, I did that kind of long, deliberately the first time. You don't need to do it quite that long, but I hope as I did it, you were able to trace and stay with me all the way through Romans 1 and Romans 2 and Romans 3, 1 to 8, and 9 to 20, and 21 to 31. That's kind of what I want you to do. So we'll keep practicing it. Some people in the past have scurried to write down notes, but I don't know that you have to do that. I think you just have to listen every time and keep trying it on your own, and you'll get it, okay? So where I want to start today is where we finished last time, not quite with chapter 4, but I want to show you something that I was noticing, especially in the Greek text, and I want to show it to you from these really, really important verses. Verses 25 and 26, right? We said that God was just and the justifier. And we did that because in verse 25 it says, he is just because he punishes sin, and he is also the one who sets people right. He's the justifier. Now, here's a little Greek lesson for you. Even if you don't know Greek, you're still going to get some, and you will learn it, and you'll have fun, okay? So what I want you to see is this. There's a phrase right there, and there's a phrase right there. Now, how many people have actually been in Greek classes? Let me see your hands, right? So you're out of bounds. You guys can't talk, right? You guys can't answer these questions, but other people can. There's a phrase that shows up, and you can see that it's identical in verses 25 and 26. Can you take a wild guess what it actually is? Yeah, exactly. Demonstrate his righteousness. All right, now that's kind of important here to make the point because, well, clearly he does say the very same thing over again, right? So he says this was to demonstrate the mercy seat part. We talked all about that, about how Jesus absorbs the wrath, because verse 25 is all about wrath. It kind of summarizes what we talked about in chapter 1 and chapter 2. The wrath of God, right, is expressed towards all this ungodliness. The Jewish version, Romans chapter 2, you're storing up wrath for yourselves as you have the law but don't do it. So this was to demonstrate his righteousness, verse 25, in that he punishes sins that had not been punished before in Jesus. But then notice this again in verse 26. This was also to demonstrate his righteousness in the present time, so he would be just and the justifier, right? The one who is actually putting the world back on track. So there are at least two ways here where the righteousness of God is demonstrated, in punishing wrath and in setting people free, putting the world back together. Okay? Now, here's the interesting part. Let me go on and just highlight these two words. Right? You see it right there. Even if you can't read Greek, you can recognize those letters. We would say them dikaiosune. Okay? That's what it reads. Now, that's the word for righteousness. And over here in the English, you see the word righteousness in 25 and in 26. Do you see righteousness anywhere else over here on the right-hand screen? Have you studied Greek? Just Spanish? Okay. You didn't get that out of Spanish? Did you? Okay. Well, Spanish helps us out here. That's good. So let's go over here. Look over here on this screen. Do you see righteous over here on this screen? Right there and right there. Right? And as Daniel pointed out, this is the word translated righteousness. Righteousness here in the two ones we saw there in purple. But then down here, this is the one that's translated just. And over here, righteous fire. Okay? Now, the reason I put it that way is because over here we have to use the word justifier, the one who makes righteous, because we don't have a verb, righteousfy. And that's why we use different words. But the trouble is then you lose the continuity. You kind of lose what's going on. So what it's saying is this is demonstrated as righteousness, that he might be the righteous one and the one who makes other people righteous. All right? You see it? We ran into the same thing with the trouble with faith and faithfulness and believe. The Greek just has one good word, pisteuo, that does everything, but we have to use different words, and so we miss the continuity between faith and faithfulness and the organic connection between them. And we also lose, Tech Planet, yeah, I wish I had to go to that. I should have gone to that. I don't want to go to that. I want to be here. We lose the connection between justification and righteousness because it's really all the same big idea. Okay? So think of it this way. This was demonstrated as righteousness in order that he might be righteous and the righteous fire of the one who believes. All right? So far, so good? Okay. So now you know a little bit of Greek that you might not have known before. Do you like my little riddler? Anybody here like riddles? Just want two people? Yeah, I'm with you because I don't like riddles. I really hate riddles because you feel so stupid when someone gives you a riddle, don't you? That's part of the reason why I hate them. So I'm going to give you some riddles, okay? See who can do this. What has a foot but no legs? What? A foot but no... Oh, a ruler. Oh, that's good. I don't think that's the right answer according to this, though. A snail. I guess a ruler. I guess you're good. How about this one? Poor people have it, rich people need it. If you eat it, you die. What is it? Who said that? Oh, gosh, is that a well-known riddle? Nothing, yeah. It's so easy, of course. What comes down but never goes up? Yeah, rain. I hate these things. I'm tall when I'm young and I'm short when I'm old. What am I? Candle. Oh gosh, I guess I should have chosen more difficult riddles. Mary's father has 5 daughters. Now notice the names. Nana, Nini, Nono. You get it? See it? So what's the 5th daughter's name? Nah. If you answered Nunu, you are wrong. But it's Mary. Yeah, you're right. Okay. Now the thing I hate about riddles. The thing I hate about riddles is because when you don't know the answer to them, you don't have any clues, you feel so dumb, and it just seems confusing. Once you know the answer to it, it's like, oh, of course. Okay. Now, the reason why I share this with you here is because I really feel that Paul is going to be a real riddler here in chapter 3 and 4. He's going to speak in ways that are just absolutely confusing, but if you know the answer, it makes it really, really easy, right? So here's his riddle. I want to show you the riddle first of all. He says things like this. It's all about faith, not the law. Faith is opposed to the law. Those of the law won't be justified, and then those under the law will be justified. And you think, what? And as I ask you to read through here and tell me, who is this person who is under the law yet saved? And as you read through all of these passages, particularly this one, and it just seems like he's speaking in riddles to me, especially when he says this. Where then is boasting? It's excluded. By what principle? Of works? No, but by the principle of faith. We consider the person is declared righteous by faith apart from works of the law. Or is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not the God of the Gentiles too? Yes, of the Gentiles too. Since God is one, he'll justify the circumcised by faith and the uncircumcised through faith. Do we then nullify the law through faith? And it looks like, well, yes, absolutely you did. You just got rid of the law. And then he says, well, absolutely not. We uphold the law. We think the law is a great thing. You'd never figured out from what you just said. Right? And then you read over here in chapter 4, beginning with verse 13, the promise to Abraham, or to his descendants, that he would inherit the world was not fulfilled through the law, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. Right? So big contrast. For if they become heirs by the law, faith is empty and the promise is nullified. For the law brings wrath, because where there's no law, there's no transgression either. And you guys are much better able to interpret this now that you've been through Galatians and you have a fuller understanding. But you can see why most people would look at this and say, okay, obviously the law is gone. That's an easy answer. Right? For this reason, it is by faith, so it may be by grace, with the result that the promise may be certain to all the descendants, not only to those who are under the law, but also to those who have the faith of Abraham. Now, if you didn't know better, and you were just reading along here, you would say, okay, it's for those who are under the law, because once they have faith, then they can jettison the law and get rid of it. But that's not what he's talking about, because he's speaking in riddles. So let me give you the answer, right? Let me kind of speak the answer to you and then picture the answer to you, and I think it'll make reading through the riddle of chapter 4 much easier. Right? So here is the written answer, okay? Now, you guys actually have this. I gave it to you in the handout. You can pull it up and look at it and mark on it or read through it if you want to. But here is my first point. Now that Paul has condemned the world in 1:18 to 3:20 and introduced the idea of faith in Jesus' faithfulness, and we're all on board with blue and red, hereinafter called faith. Now, you can't quite see it in yours, but that's actually purple, okay? So that's why I said cute. I know, I'm trying to be cute there with the purple. Right? Just so we don't wig out about, oh, gee, there's a blue faith, there's a red faith. Well, it's the faith and the faithfulness, okay? So leave it at that. Hereinafter called faith, he's going to clarify how law fits or doesn't fit in God's program. What place does the law have here? So where we're going to go is this. His basic idea in chapter 4 and in this short intro to 4, which is 27 to 31, introduction to 4, is that faith is the essential component and law is a secondary one, but not gone. Okay? Faith is the essential one. Law is okay, but it's not gone. He's not kicking it out. The point is not that faith has displaced law since Jesus has come, a misunderstanding you might get if you only read 3:28. Okay, let me put 28 up here. Right? This kind of direct contrast. A person is declared righteous by faith apart from works of law. Right? You're tending to think, okay, these two are absolutely separate. But he's not saying that. Right? only that a person must have either faith and the law, good if you're Jewish, or just faith, good if you are a Gentile. But notice that the key component is faith. Here or here, in case 1 or case 2, the key component is faith. The non-essential but acceptable components, this is the kind of the answer to the riddle, okay, is law, but everyone must have faith to rock and roll, okay? Obviously, a third option of law but no faith will not get you into the concert, much less in the band. I have no idea what that means. I just was on a kind of a roll when I wrote it, okay? Third option is really bad. You don't even get in, okay, with that. So, let me also say this. He's also saying that because faith is what saves us, and it's available to Gentiles as well as Jews, that this is the focus of God's being righteous and redeeming the whole world rather than just one nation. So let me just pause for a second and see if we're on board, if this statement makes sense. We good? Okay. Then let's play The Price is Right here. Okay. Go on to the 3 doors. Now again, if you didn't quite understand that or the text didn't work for you, maybe the picture will. And this, again, I think is the answer to the riddle, which will make everything else make sense as we walk through the passage. So moving from the bottom to the top, that's what the kind of the dashed arrows are really all about. Can you tell me, obviously we're starting down here in the bottom level with no faith or faith, some with a law, some with no law. We've got 3 boxes at the top. If you start with no faith and you do the law, there will be a certain kind of evidence in your life. I'm not going to tell you whether it's good or bad. You'll have to figure it out. If you start with faith and you do the law, there's going to be a certain kind of evidence in your life. I'm not going to tell you what it is. You have to figure it out. But if you start here with faith and you're not doing the law, there will be a certain kind of evidence in your life. You can figure it out. I'm not going to tell you, once again. But can you tell me then what kind of person or who this is? Can you identify what kind of person each one of these boxes is talking about in very specific ways? All right? So do it. Group up. I hope it's fairly self-evident, but maybe not. So group up and see if you can write down exactly who those people are, because they're all distinct. Say what? You got them?
Yeah. Unsaved Jewish person. Saved Jewish person.
There you go. Okay, you guys ready to go? We all done? So, shall we shout it out all together? Person number 1 is Jewish unbeliever. Right? Person number 2 is Jewish believer. Person number 3 is Gentile believer. Now, that may seem very, very, very simple to you, but trust me, as we work down through the passage, simply having those 3 options clears up so much confusion that I probably don't even have to teach you. I can just dismiss class right now. Should we? No? Okay. All right. Thank you, Mrs. Ty. All right. All right. Then, with that, now we'll keep that in mind, right? So we're going to call these people. When we get down through the passages, I'm going to ask you, which number are we talking about here? So you can keep it in front of you so you can say 1, 2, or 3. Right? I think this is the biggest problem because most people think that Paul is contrasting 2 and 3 when sometimes he's contrasting 3 and 1. All right? Okay. All right, then let's go to our questions then and pick up where the questions start. Question number 1. This chapter is about more than explanation of faith, though it certainly is that. It really involves what kind of family it is that people who trust in Messiah's atonement are joining. So, how is the family defined and how is it not defined? Very, very specifically, how is it you get into the family? Or how do you define this family? Who wants to go out on a limb and answer the trick question? Slightly trick question. Answer. No one in their right mind will answer that. Now they know it's a trick question. So how is the family defined? What do you have to do to get in the family? Yeah, you have to have faith. And that's an absolutely correct answer, but it's not a totally complete answer. So can you keep going? Yeah, no, you're on track there. Having faith is the right answer. That's far enough. But there's still a little bit more that we could add. I mean, just think about where we've been. Yeah, but start with what Ryan said. You have to have faith, and you have to have faith and been circumcised. You have to have faith like Abraham. Okay, I'll give you that. But how does the circumcision fit into it? Is the circumcision necessary or is it not? Is circumcision disallowed? No, right? And that's, Phil? Faith in heaven. Okay, all right. You have to, I'll give you that. You do have to have genuine faith. But what I want you to say here is you have to have genuine faith, and you might have a law or you might not have a law. Going back to the original statement I said, where faith is the essential component and law is an acceptable one dependent upon who you are. So it's not like faith has displaced law. Its faith is the primary one, as it always has been. But you can be Jewish or you can be Gentile, but you've got to have faith no matter what your relationship to law is. Okay? So I want you to include law as a secondary thing, as an acceptable thing. So the point is this: you can be either number 2 or number 3, doesn't matter, right? Up here on the screen. You can be number 2 or number 3, but you can't be 1. Okay? All right. Then, as we go through here, I think you'll see it even more. Number 2, verses 1 through 5. What event in Abraham's life does this describe? What chapter in Genesis? Was this his salvation experience? Why or why not? So in 4, 1 to 5, what chapter is this in Genesis? And you really have to become a student of Genesis 12 to 22 to help make this chapter work. Right? So what chapter in Genesis are we talking about here? Yep, 15. Very good. We're talking about chapter 15, where he demonstrates the faith of in chapter 4, verse 3, because Abraham believed God and was credited him for his righteousness. Normally, it wouldn't make people do this, but since you guys are such an elite group of Roman students, I'm going to make you memorize it. Not just Genesis 15, but Genesis 15, what? 6. Yeah, very good. Genesis 15, 6. You just ought to know that, okay? So it clearly is a statement of faith. Now, the next question was this his salvation experience? Why or why not? Yes or no? No? Jeremiah? Why? Yeah, he had already believed in Genesis 12, right? He believed because Genesis 12, verse 4, he went, he left. And in Hebrews 11 says that by faith Abraham left Ur. Right? So that's really weird. If he's not saved in Genesis 12, then you get an unbeliever exercising faith in the promises of God, which doesn't really quite work. So what I want you to see, so what then do we conclude about Genesis 15? If this is not a salvation experience, how in the world can we say, and he believed God and was credited to him as righteousness? How do you explain that if that's not his salvation experience? And you can, I want to hear you say it. Yeah, it's the kind of faith which you demonstrate, which a believer demonstrates every day. Okay? It's like saying you heard a message that the preacher preached about the Word of God, and you responded to it, and God credited to you for righteousness. Like, okay, you've already been saved, but if you weren't saved, that would have kind of done it. Because you're responding to God in faith, the kind of faith which saves. Okay, so I think we can say here that in 15, from Genesis 12 to 15, he is saved. He's expressing faith, and he expresses even more faith here in chapter 15, and he does in 17 as well. And I think that's all I want to say about that. Okay. Now, the only other thing I want to ask you about is this, verse 2. If Abraham was declared righteous by the works of the law, he has something to boast about, but not before God. Now, how in the world could you ever say in Genesis 15 or 12 or 17, was he justified by the works of the law? Since we all know, we're talking 2000 BC, and the law doesn't even come around until 1446, another 500 years later, right? So in what sense could Paul be arguing was he justified by the works of the law when we all know that it was 500 years away from it? So it doesn't make any sense at all. But Paul somehow thinks it does. You understand where he's going with this? It gets clear in the later verses, but I want you to kind of pick it up here. In what sense is works of the law up there on that screen? Kara? Yes, he was circumcised in chapter 17. And the circumcision, even though it is not the entire works of the law, kind of works as a symbol of Jewishness and the law here in the story of Genesis. So what he's trying to demonstrate, what Paul is really trying to get at, and this becomes even clearer in the later verses, but he kind of touches upon it here, is that right here, at least, he is saved in chapter 15. Was that when he had the works law? No, that stuff didn't come till here, and he is saved at least here, and certainly by here. Okay? All right. If that's foggy, we'll get it in the next pass, which is a couple verses from here. So number 3, not a hard question. Don't make it too hard. What is the relationship between Paul's use of David and Abraham here? That is, what is he showing with David and what is he showing with Abraham? So there's Abraham and there's David. Anybody got an answer for this one? Who will do it for me? Stephen?
It's just that Paul's kind of using Abraham as an example of faith and David as an example of grace. So Abraham is kind of his righteousness, whereas David shows God passing over David's sins.
Yeah, your ideas are right, although I would probably use a little bit different terminology, but I think the basic idea is right. You guys hear what he said? I think he's absolutely right. This is why I played the Newsboys in the beginning, right? You notice what they do with the lyrics here? When we don't get what we deserve, it's a real good thing. When we get what we don't deserve, it's a real good thing. Just by the cute little poetic change, they're talking about 2 different theological concepts. Can you tell me what they are? Typically, we call them mercy and grace, right? So which one's grace and which one's mercy? The top one is mercy, and when we get what we don't deserve, that's grace, yeah, okay? So, with Abraham and David now then, which one of those is Abe and which one of those is Dave? The top one is, yeah, I think that's David, and I think that's kind of Abraham, right? So, did I put this in the outline? Oh, I did. I even put it in the outline. See, I'm telling you what, if you just look at the outline, you can learn so much. Abraham's positive example and David's negative example. I think that's all he's doing because chapter 4, verse 8 in Romans here, blessed is the one against whom the Lord will never count sin. Do you know where that comes from? What psalm that comes from? Psalm 32. When did David write Psalm 32? At the same time as he wrote Psalm 51. It's one of those great psalms with David and with Bathsheba and Uriah. Okay? Thank you, God, for not giving me what I deserve. Right? Okay? It's a real good thing. One of the reasons I will always love the Newsboys, even though they're no longer a group or hardly a group anymore. Just great poetry and theology all together. Okay? So let's go on then to number 4, 9 to 12. What is the chronology of this section, or at least describe it in terms of chapters of Genesis? Now, I think you can do this probably pretty easily now. 9 to 12. Is this blessedness then for the circumcision or also for the uncircumcision? For we say faith was credited to Abraham as righteousness. Again, Genesis 15:6. How then was it credited to him? Was he circumcised at the time or not? No, he was not circumcised, but uncircumcised. And he received the sign of circumcision as a seal of the righteousness that he had by faith while he was still uncircumcised, so he would become the father of all those who believe but have never been circumcised, that they too could have righteousness credited to them. And he is also the father of the circumcised, who are not only circumcised, but who also walk in the footsteps of the faith that our father Abraham possessed when he was still uncircumcised. Right? So the chronology is simply this. Is Abraham a Jew or a Gentile? Now, you probably never thought about that question before, but it's actually a legitimate question. Is Abraham a Jew or a Gentile? A, yes. B, no. C, none of the above. C, yes, exactly right. Not C, that's probably a... D, none of the above. Okay, yeah. Is he a Jew or is he a Gentile? And Paul would say both or neither, or it depends upon when you're talking about him. Okay? So to trace Paul's argument here, what he's saying is the circumcision starts right there. That's like the kind of works which he has done, which are good evidences, kind of his law. But the truth is that right there he's a Gentile, and right there becomes a Jew, kind of, in Paul's thinking in this chapter. Does that make sense? So the beautiful part about this is why he can become, went too far. This is why he become a prototype for Gentiles and a prototype for Jews as well. Because he had faith before he was circumcised, so and faith after. So let's look at this then, and notice I've got up here the numbers. Not 1 and 2. 1 and 2 up here simply mean we've got a first case and a second case. But can you then go back to your chart, go back to this chart, right, and give me a number here, 1, 2, or 3 for the first one? Which number are we going to put there? Hold on here. Let me see if I can get my whole thing working. I want this to be red. Oh, it's green. It's St. Patrick's Day. Should I leave it green? No? Okay. Actually, at our church on Sunday, we, as a congregation, read through one of the prayers of St. Patrick. Had nothing to do with beer. It was a great, powerfully gospel-oriented statement. You know, he was actually a missionary to Ireland in the 5th century when the Irish and the Angles and Saxons were horrible people, and single-handedly led so many people to Christ. It was just unbelievable. St. Patrick, when I read that and found out about that and knew about that, it was like, oh my goodness, St. Patrick's Day is just like Christmas. You know, the cultural understanding of it and the real understanding of it are different as night and day. And I wish you a very happy St. Patrick's Day in the original sense of the term. Okay? Sorry, I just couldn't help myself. Back to red now. And so you tell me, this first one is what number? 3. Yeah, that one is 3. He's actually a Gentile, right? Isn't that the right thing? And what is 412? Yep, it's number 2. Okay, good? So far, so good? I'll save that. And then what's the next question that we're coming to here? Number 5, who are those who become heirs by the law? Describe them carefully. So let's go down here then to verse 13. For the promise, and to verse 14. For the promise to Abraham or to his descendants that he would inherit the world was not fulfilled through the law, but through the righteousness that comes by faith. For if they become heirs by the law, faith is empty and the promise is nullified. For the law brings wrath, because where there is no law, there is no transgression either. Now in verse 14, what number are we working with? Are we all agreed on that? True, Miguel? Is it 1? Not sure. Ryan? Think so? Tim? Yes, absolutely. This is 1. Now, did you guys have that already? Did you have that in your in the notes when you looked at that question? Yes or no? No? Okay. Does that make sense with what we've talked about so far? You guys aren't talking to me now. Yeah, okay, thanks, Sean. Rachel, thank you, I appreciate that. All right, so who are those who become heirs by law? In verse 14, we indeed are talking about those people in door number 1, right? Whoops. Save that. Let me go up here then. For this reason, it is by faith, so it may be by grace, with the result that the promise may be certain to all the descendants, not only to those who have the faith of Abraham, who is the father of us all. So, talk to me then about the number over here on the left-hand side and the one over there on the right-hand side. And just for fun, I'll put this back up here. Door number 1, 2, or 3, those who are under the law. Which ones are we talking about here? Yep. Those people here, in fact, are going to be 2s. And people over here on the right-hand side are going to be door number 3s. Okay? Now just take that in and see if it makes sense to you. Okay? Daniel? Yes.
Also apply to proselytes or other Gentiles who want to get in on the promises and think they need to be circumcised in order to do that?
Yeah, I think it would be, but it all matters about what their motive is, right? These are proselytes who do it now, therefore they deny Messiah. They would be people who would have only law but no faith. Yeah, absolutely. Or, more likely, they're simply Jewish people who have rejected Messiah, right? And obviously they're only under wrath from Romans chapter 2. Yep. All right? Okay, yeah, Nancy? So where does what? Where's the proselyte fit in the chart? Well, it all depends upon, if you're talking about Nicholas, right? If you're talking about Nicholas, what number would Nicholas be? He'd be number 2. Mm-hmm. And where would Cornelius be? Number 3. Mm-hmm. All right? Okay. Good. So let's go on to this discussion then of faith. And I think this is really kind of fascinating too. Look at verse 17. As is written, I have made you the father of many nations. He is our father in the presence of God, whom he believed. Now, tell me what's so interesting about Paul's statement here. I've made you the father of many nations. What chapter does that come from? It's Genesis. It's one of 3 chapters in Genesis. It's either 12, 15, or 17. It's 17, exactly. It's when he circumcises him, and he says, I'll still make you the father of many nations, not just Israel, but of Gentiles as well. So that's why it's kind of fun for him to say this. He is our father in the presence of God, whom he believed. Now, when he says he is our father, what does he mean when he says our? He's talking about Jews and Gentiles, right? Because he was saved when he was a Gentile and saved when he's a Jew. That kind of thing. Looking at the chart up here. All right. He is our Father in the presence of God, whom he believed, the God who makes the dead alive and summons the things that do not yet exist as though they already do. Now, obviously, that's kind of important because in Genesis 17 is where he gives them a promise of what? Besides just circumcision, it's a promise of what? He changed his name from Abram to Abraham because you're going to have a son, right? And as we're going to move here to the next couple of verses, we're going to see this promise that God makes to him. Abraham believes that promise and grows strong in faith. But I think it also answers this situation too. I'm talking here not only about Isaac's birth, but about God's ability to resurrect the promises which seem so dead right now in AD 57 too. Okay? And you know what those are. So let's go on then to this next section and let's talk about faith and what he in fact believed in. So this question of number 6. Romans 4, 18 to 22, give yes or no answers to questions A through C. If Miguel's wife is expecting and they want a boy, right? and they want a boy. Can they, by faith, paint the nursery blue? Yes or no? No? Oh, okay. Interesting. Letter B, can I have faith that God will provide my tuition bills of $10,000 next semester and plunk down my savings and $10,000 into a car now? No. Can I get on a plane and have faith that God will take care of me? Oh, you guys, at least you're unanimous here. That's good. I can't wait to hear the explanations. So, letter D, explain your answers to these quick questions and give me your biblical definition of faith. Those of you who said no about Miguel in letter A, tell me why you said no. Why can't he and his wife, by faith, paint the nursery blue, saying, look, we're trusting God for a boy. We know we're going to have a boy. We're believing God. We're going to paint it blue. Why can't they do that? Because, wait, before you answer, how come he can't? How come Abraham did? Because what, Rachel? It was promised specifically to Abraham. Has it been promised to Miguel? No. Okay, so let's go on to the next one. Letter B. Can you have faith that God will provide your tuition bills of $10,000 for next semester? What? And throw your $10,000 into a car now? Why not? Has God promised to supply all your needs? Not if you're being unwise. And has God promised you that you ought to be here in school next semester? Now, for your seniors, you're going to say, please, God, no, don't let them. But let's assume you're all juniors here for a second. Do you know it's God's will for you to be here in school? You don't really know that, do you? I mean, you hope it is, you want it to be, but maybe God wants you to take some time off for whatever reason in His sovereign will, right? You don't know that. So this is curious to me then. Why did you say, letter C, can I get on a plane and have faith that God will take care of me? Why did you say yes to that and no to the other ones? Come on, everybody did, Casey.
I guess in my mind, that's not a specific thing. So, like, we don't necessarily know how God will take care of us.
Yes.
And that can be something that maybe I think is one way and it's actually another. But just having that general faith that God will do what's best for me in whatever situation.
So it involves a plane crash?
Well, maybe. I don't know.
If we die, our souls are saved.
So you think you're going to Atlanta, but you actually go to heaven. Right?
I put yes and then changed it to no because I think we can have faith that He could protect us and He can and He has that ability, but that might not be what His will is for us.
Yes, you're right. And so that's why I deliberately phrased it, take care of, right? And that's what I want you to think about. So what does it mean that God is going to protect me and take care of me? It might be that it's my day to die on a cross at the hands of people who are doing it for all the wrong reasons, right? But that's perfect protection in the plan of God. There's no safer place to be. And so I did not write the question and say, can I get on a plane and have faith that I will arrive at my intended destination? Because that one is clearly no. I don't know if we're going to make it to that place or not, right? So the way we've answered the questions then reveals how we have defined what faith is, and I think you've defined it correctly by the way you've answered the questions. So can you just articulate it for me now? What is biblical faith, Ryan? Yeah, that's not a bad way to put it. Faith is believing in the character of God, but according to this chapter, you might want to add just a little bit more to it. Yes, God delivering on His promises. So let's finish what he started. Faith is believing in the character and the promises of God, and then acting upon it, right? And that's as full a definition as you ever need for what faith is. And so that's why we can say, by faith I'm going to paint the nursery blue, but it's not really biblical faith because it's not grounded in the promise of God. Right? Whereas it is for Abraham because God has given him a promise he's going to have a boy. All right? So, was there something else in that question we needed to answer? Oh, let's just go back to this. And notice again what's circled in red. You see it here? Against hope, Abraham believed in hope with the result, he became the father of many nations according to the pronouncement, so will your descendants be. Right? So there's the promise. God said it. Verse 20. He did not waver in unbelief about the promise of God, was strengthened in faith, giving glory to God, and he was fully convinced that what God promised, he was also able to do. So there you have it, really, really emphasized. Faith is taking God at his word and acting in accordance with it. Okay? So indeed, it was credited to Abraham as righteousness. Yeah. Now, let me ask you this. Did we talk in Galatians about the usefulness of this for a prayer life? Did we talk about what we pray for? I couldn't remember if we had that discussion or not. So think about it for a second, and tell me then what the implications of a prayer life then this would have. How would this affect the way you pray? Say it again, it would what?
Kind of like gets rid of the safe travels prayers, or like even like sickness prayers, maybe like healing for like same thing, but even like if someone's sick, like God help them to get better. Well, it's like, you know, it kind of takes care of this because it's not like a promise of God that they're always going to be healthy.
Mm-hmm.
But that like so maybe like maybe you make them well enough to do what you would have them to do, but never like take the flu away from them or help them arrive from point A to point B. Like that would be kind of
Yeah. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't pray, God help the people who are sick or help me get over the flu. But if we're going to pray according to the will of God, do I know if it's God's will for me to get over that? So what if we reoriented our prayers and started praying, first of all, about things which we knew to be the will of God? Then what would our prayers sound like? If Claire has been sick and missed being in class, and we're hoping she'll get better, and we're praying for her to get better, that's a good thing. But I don't think we should leave it at that. What should we pray for Claire if she's sick, or somebody else who's sick, or who isn't here today, or who's not feeling very good today? What else should we pray for you about your sickness? What do you know to be the will of God for sick people? Yeah, rely on Him, right? Absolutely. That through this experience, would draw them closer to God. Not just being sick, but any kind of disappointment in life. God help them to be comforted. Well, maybe. But help them to be holy? Better? Right? And I'm not saying we shouldn't pray for those other things. Lord, it hurts us that they're hurting and we don't like that, but God, we really want what you want. So you just go to Gethsemane. What does Jesus pray for? I'm not crazy about suffering. I don't really want to suffer, but there's something more important, isn't there? Right? Nevertheless, we want your will to be done, not our own. So God, whatever it takes, whatever in this sickness, whatever in this disease, whatever in this decision that's out of my hands and somebody else's hands, I really pray that you would answer in a way which would make me more holy and a better testimony where people could where you could be glorified through my responses. Right? And so when it comes here to what Abraham was thinking about and what he was trusting in, his faith was not just faith in what he was hoping for or in his own comfort or just what he wanted. It was in what God had promised for him. And so as his faith is directed that way, the same thing our prayers ought to be and our lives ought to be directed that way too. And it's a pretty good example for it here. Right? Okay, let's take a look at this last little section then, which is this. But the statement, it was credited to him, I think Genesis 15:6 just got quoted for the fourth time in this chapter. The statement, it was credited to him, was not written only for Abraham's sake, but also for our sake, to whom it will be credited. For those who, the essential component is what? Faith. Right? Believe in the one who raised Jesus our Lord from the dead. So that's kind of interesting here, and I think it's very fascinating to see where Paul has drawn all this theology from. And you notice where he drew it from? The chronology of Genesis 12 and 15 and 17. Actually didn't have to use Genesis 12:3 this time like he did in Galatians. But he was able to go back to Genesis 15, Abraham as a prototype for Gentiles who doesn't have the law or circumcision, who simply believes. And that's why Abraham is the perfect example here, the first Gentile and the first Jew, kind of, who believes. He was given over because of our transgressions. He was raised for the sake of our justification. Yep. It's fascinating. Paul finishes with this discussion, and I'm probably going to give this away, but I can't help myself. It's really interesting. You take a look at the last verse in chapter 5, and the last verse in chapter 6, and the last verse in chapter 7, and he always comes back to the same thing. So, the homework for chapter 5 is up there, in case you're ready to get to it. And I can't think of anything else to talk to you about. Do you guys have any leftover questions or things you want to say about chapter 4? Yeah, Daniel. Mm-hmm. Yeah, good question too. There are actually kind of two questions there. So let's just talk about those. The second one first, which is how do you understand those passages? And all things whatsoever you shall ask, believing, you shall receive. Matthew 21. Right? Nowhere does Paul or Jesus or Isaiah give the entire theology of a certain topic all at once. What Jesus is emphasizing is the fact there that it takes faith, that faith is an essential component. But of course, faith is believing the promises of God. So everything you ask in prayer, believing in a promise of God, you will receive. Because that's the definition of faith, right? So that's what Jesus is talking about. Now, it's been hijacked because people take it out of that context and don't understand what faith really is. And so they say what faith is simply believing and visualizing and imagining something that will happen. Right? And I think there's an awful lot of the world that feels that way. I know that's the way I felt up until I was 6 years old. Because I remember the very first time I can remember praying really hard was when I went to this circus and there was a go-kart that was auctioned off or raffled off, right? And you bought a ticket for it, and I really wanted that thing because I could visualize myself driving that go-kart around the block and picking up girls, you know. There was a cute little 4-year-old that had a really cute little ponytail, and I can just imagine as a 5-year-old, maybe I was 6, I don't remember, but I absolutely do remember, this is a true story. I remember seeing that car and just wanting it and praying and praying and praying. And my conception was that if I believed it hard enough, I could visualize it hard enough. I thought that's what Jesus was saying, right? Because my dad was reading the Bible to me at nighttime, and I was trying to figure this stuff out. And I thought that faith was simply imagining what I wanted to be true. Well, I didn't get the car. And I realized either God had failed me or my theology had. And it took me years to realize that my theology was not so good here. That faith is far more than just visualizing what you want. And yet, there's so many people in the health and wealth gospel, or what was the exact phrase? Yeah, the word of faith. Yeah, and that's exactly how they understand it. If you just say it, God will then make it happen magically. Well, that's just sorcery or mumbo-jumbo or something, but it's not a biblical definition of faith, and that is certainly out there, and it's not what the biblical text supports at all. Yeah, good question. Never to get that go-kart. Still kind of want it. Yeah, good. What else? Anything else coming up about faith? Because unfortunately, when we leave chapter 4, we're going to kind of leave it. Not that we can't go back to it, but right. So now we've got a whole lot of stuff there in Romans 1 to 4 for you to start remembering and putting together. I mean, you've got the essence of the gospel right there. Now we're going to go on in 5, 6, 7, and 8 to other bigger things, but an awful lot of the big message is already there. So practice it over the weekend. Practice it when you wake up in the morning. First thing when you wake up, before you get out of bed, see if you can think your way through Romans. Last thing before you go to bed at night, see if you can think your way through Romans. right? And then maybe you'll dream about Romans. And I bet it'll be the best dreams you had. Right? Okay, I'm good. If you're good, have a good weekend, guys. Pass those